Hello everyone, my name is Ryan, and in this lesson I'll be showing you how to work with tables. So to begin, I've got my standard template in HTML and I'm linking to a CSS file called tables.css, and that's currently empty. So let's go and have a look at w3schools.com and go to our tag reference. And over here we've got a couple of tags that we're going to be working with for our table. So the main tag for a table is just simply table, and it's kind of like a block tag but not quite the same. The difference is that it does not stretch the full width of the browser. Okay, so you can see the opening table tag and the closing table tag. All the other table tags need to be in between this table tag. Next up we have a row, TR for table row. So each row in the table is enclosed with TR tags. And then each row in the table has cells or columns. And those are created using the TD tag. TD short for table data. So here is one cell, here's another cell. So think of it like columns, one column, second column within the same row. And then another tag we're going to look at is TH for table header, and this is going to replace the TD tag. So it also goes inside of a TR tag, but the TH is going to bold the text inside of the cell, and it's going to center the text inside of the cell. Other than that, it's exactly the same as the TD. And then lastly, we may also look at the caption tag. The caption is used to assign a caption to the table. Usually the caption tag goes before the very first row of the table, and then the text in between that will be displayed above the table. So let's get straight into coding this table. I'll start by opening my table tag. Then I'll open my table row tag. In my first row I'm going to have a column, and in that column I'm just going to put some text. Then I'm going to create another column and another column. Then I'll make another row in my table, and I'm just going to put some fruit in these cells. The table needs to always be symmetrical, so you'll see that because I had 3 columns in the first row, I need to also have 3 columns in the second row. So I need one more column, and let's just do one more row for good measure. Let's have cars. Okay, now let's give some columns to these, some column headings to these columns. So I'll just change these TDs to THs. Remember, TH stands for table header, and you'll notice what it does is it actually just bolds the text and centers it. We don't really see the centering at this point, but if I had to add a bit more content, we'll start to notice it. Okay, so at this stage I've got a table. You'll see that the table has grown to fill the full width of the page, and it does grow depending on the content you place within the table. So I'm just going to even it out a bit by putting some more content into my third column. Let me replace this with a picture. And then I'm just going to artificially reduce the width just for now. So there's my picture. And it's currently the very first column of row 2. Here's row 1, here's row 2. Okay, then in column 3 I still want to put some more information. So let's put some lorem text. Okay, now to make the table look a little bit neater, we'll put some style sheets. So in my CSS file, I'll start by creating a border around the table. So if I put a 1 pixel solid black border, notice it's put the border all the way around. We may also want to put some borders in between the cells as well. So I'm going to add a border on the TDs. And then we also need a border in between our table headers. So I'll add that to our table header as well. Let's see how that looks. Not too bad. So it's created a kind of a double border effect. To make things look a little bit neater, we can add a bit of padding onto our TDs and THs. And I'm sure you'll see the difference immediately. There's 10 pixels of padding all the way around the headers and all the way around the cells. Next up, we can increase the spacing between these borders. If I go to W3 Schools, to the CSS reference, and I go to the section on tables, you'll see one of these properties is border dash spacing. And we can set that to be either separate, which is the default value, or we can specify a length in pixels. So I'm going to add some border spacing in pixels, and this we normally apply to the table itself. So border dash spacing, and let me put 5 pixels of spacing. Notice how the gap between the borders has increased. Let's go for a nice thick one, 15, just to give you an idea of what it looks like. Now you may not like the idea of the border spacing. In that case, you can actually collapse the borders down into one, and the property that we use for that is called border collapse, border dash collapse, and we set the value to be a value of collapse. By default, it has a value of separate for separate borders. So I'm going to just set the border collapse property to collapse. Notice how the borders have now collapsed into one single border, and that makes the border spacing redundant, which we can just copy that out for now. Okay, now it may look quite nice to put some background colors onto our table cells. So if I go and set a background color for the table header, that's a bit dark, so I'm going to have to set the foreground color to white. Maybe change the font family as well. And then I need to also set the background colors on the normal cells as well. I'll use a lighter blue for that. And then I also want to change the font. Okay, so that looks quite nice. So just with a bit of CSS, we can make a huge difference to our table. Now let's add a caption to our table. So we'll switch back to the HTML. And remember, the caption needs to be before the first row of the table. So we'll go caption, my cool table. Refresh, and notice we have to put the caption right above the table in the center. Now you might not like the caption to be there. You can reposition the caption using a special CSS property called caption-side, and this can have a value of either top or bottom. By default it's set to top. So let's experiment with setting the caption to the bottom. So on your table property, we'll say table caption. Was it caption? Sorry, caption-side, bottom. Notice how it's moved the caption to the bottom of the table. And then we could maybe change the appearance a little bit of the caption. So we'll create a caption style. Maybe italic, and maybe slightly smaller size. Let's say 14 pixels. Okay, make sure you spell caption correctly. Alright, so now I've got my caption at the bottom. It's a bit small, so maybe make it a bit bigger. And then if we wanted to align it, we could say text-align and send it to the right hand side or the left hand side. I think the left will be a bit better. Okay, so there's my caption. Remember, the caption is optional. You do not have to have a caption. So next up is merging cells together, and the first one we're going to do is called row span. So row span allows you to take one block and span it over multiple rows. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the word oranges and I'm going to span it over 2 rows. So we'll switch back to the HTML for this, and here's my word apples, oranges. And all we do is we add an attribute in there called row span, and we set it to a value of 2. Now the problem with that is that we have no longer got a symmetrical table because we've got Ferrari that's been pushed out. So I need to remove the content of the entire cell below this one. That would be in the next row. So I'm going to just remove this entire TD. Now the table should once again be symmetrical. Notice how the orange block spans the entire 2 rows. If I had more than 2 rows in my table, I could actually span this over even more than 2 rows. So next up is the col span that allows us to span over multiple columns. So for this I'm just going to add a new row to the table. So we'll say table row, and this time I'm going to span over 3 columns. So col span equal to 3, and then I'll put some lorem content inside of that. Let's take a look. Notice how it's now got a new row in the table, and that's got content spanning over all 3 columns. 1 column, 2 columns, 3 columns. So that's the difference between row span, which goes vertically, and col span, which goes horizontally. Now what we can do is we can align the content within the blocks of the cells. So for example, if I wanted to align the word oranges to the top of the cell, I could do that using the style sheet vertical dash align, which we looked at in an earlier video. Vertical dash align. And this can have various values. I'm going to set it to top so that it moves it to the top of the block. So we switch to the HTML first. I'm going to give a class to this block with oranges inside of it. And I'll just say class equals top. And then in the CSS, I'm going to make a special class for it. And I'm going to set the vertical alignment to top. Notice how the word oranges is now aligned to the top of the block. In the same way, let's say I would like to take the word Ferrari and align it to the bottom right hand corner of the block. So I'd need two CSS properties for this. Let's create a class called bottom right. And then we're going to set the vertical alignment to bottom and the horizontal alignment to right. So in the HTML, I'm going to then give this class, this block, a class of bottom right. Refresh. Notice how Ferrari moves to the bottom right of the block. So we can therefore align content within the blocks in various ways. So that brings us to the end of our lesson on working with tables in HTML and CSS.